So the first one, primary packaging. So this is your can, this is your bottle, this is the seam, the cap that goes on top of it. Primary packaging today is dicey. It's the most disrupted part of the supply chain, and ultimately when you're bringing a product to market, this is the first thing that you're gonna wanna go and source because you're not sure how long it's gonna take for your cans to arrive, for your bottles to arrive. Can you get access within the next 4 months because Anheuser-Busch has already ordered all of the 2022 inventory for XYZ can. Then overlay that with the complexity of cannabis emulsion, the actual input doesn't play friendly with all different packaging formats. Cans oftentimes will absorb the THC into the liner of the can itself, so when you go to drink it, there won't actually be any cannabis in there. So finding the right cans is extremely important. You see similar issues with plastic bottles. You've got oxygen ingresses into the bottle and causes the THC to degrade. That's another watch out as you're going through the packaging process. And so ultimately what I'd say is partner with a broker that understands cannabis packaging and knows the watch outs. And before you put a PO for anything, get samples and test it with the emulsion that you're going to use. Because the last thing you want is a container full of cans on the way that it turns out they're not gonna work. Next thing to focus on is beverage formulation. And in cannabis beverage specifically, you wanna err on the side of simplicity in your supply chain, because ultimately you need to be solving for having a cannabis beverage manufacturer in multiple states. Unlike Monster, for example, can send all of their inputs to a single co-packer in the Northeast and then get that to the entire US, you're gonna have to figure out how to get your raw material inputs to multiple places if you're planning on scaling nationally. And so if you think about having a refrigerated supply chain, for example, if you've got frozen juices that you choose to formulate with, this is gonna cause an immense amount of added complexity when trying to figure out how to get that to different places. It's also gonna impact your cost structure, and then with COVID, just general supply chain management. This is something I'd say in right now's environment, you wanna make sure you optimize for simplicity and scalability when figuring out how to actually formulate your drink. Emulsion selection is gonna come down to finding the right partner. At the end of the day, this is not something I would solve on my own if I was bringing a cannabis beverage to market. I'd say at the head of the industry, you've got Vertosa and Source. I've seen a lot of other water-soluble products coming from the CBD and moving into the THC space. Some of those not even emulsion technology, different technologies that seem to have different properties, and based on what you're trying to get out of your drink, whether it be clarity, onset time, flavor profile, you're gonna wanna try everything, in my opinion, and figure out what works best for you, and then figure out what's stable. Because when you look at what your beverage formulation is gonna be from the prior slide, that's gonna be a mix and match with what type of emulsion you can use. Certain types of juices will knock your cannabis emulsion out of solution and put you in a position where you've just got a bunch of cannabis sitting at the bottom of a beverage instead of in somebody's bloodstream. And so critical takeaway for emulsion is find the right partner, and I would say do your homework and test everything that you can before you make a decision. Labels and shrink sleeves. So the cannabis industry is small, which means you're likely gonna have to buy your labels separately from your cans or your bottles. In bigger beverage industry, Anheuser-Busch, for example, they'll get everything printed on cans and then they'll ship that to their manufacturer. You likely won't have the scale to do something like that given where cannabis beverage is today. And so you have to focus on what type of label is your manufacturer able to use and able to scale with. And so this is a conversation of identifying your manufacturer's capabilities and then building a label solution around that. Because ultimately, again, you don't want to invest in something up front only to find later on that it doesn't meet your needs. This is also a key place where lead times can certainly stretch out longer than anticipated. And so this is a workflow that as soon as you start your primary packaging, you say, hey, I know I'm going to be in a can. Then you also simultaneously start working on your label, because these are two things that could keep you from getting to market on time. Secondary packaging. So think about the box that you pick up a 6-pack in. That's what secondary packaging is. And then the box that those boxes get delivered in are secondary packaging. And so the key takeaway for secondary packaging is watch your costs on this. This is the one piece of the puzzle where I've seen high levels of variability between different vendors. And ultimately, it's going to be hard enough to put a cannabis beverage out to market that you believe is at a competitive cost compared to craft beer and other functional beverages. Retail packaging is a place where I've seen people way overshoot, and then all of a sudden their product has to be way more expensive, otherwise their gross margin is going to be wildly upside down. And so this is another one. Do your homework, talk to multiple vendors, and be careful about costs ramping up at the secondary packaging level. I'll show you a bill of materials in a second, and you'll see one large line item. It's the secondary packaging. It seems friendly at first, and it's a great way to market your product, and so it is important, but that's the key thing that I've seen happen a couple different times that people have brought in drinks to market. So here's an example product development timeline, and the key thing to understand here is run simultaneous workflows. I think the fastest you could expect to get a drink to market is 4 months. I very rarely have seen anyone actually accomplish that. And that's assuming that you've got your concept down. You know exactly what you want, and you're not iterating from the ground up in terms of what is the goal of my product, who am I marketing this to, and why. All those questions are answered. Now we're executing. And so when going through these workflows, make sure you launch everything as soon as possible. And I would say be capitalized that you can put in purchase orders for things as you're going. Otherwise, you're not going to get the attention of vendors, and you're going to be in a tough situation where one of these lead times is going to push you back to 6 months or 8 months. And so you need to be extremely proactive in today's environment to make sure that you're able to source everything that you need to get your beverage to market on time. So here's that example bill of materials. Now what you'll find here is cannabis beverages aren't all that different in cost structure from a regular beverage. The key differentiating factor being THC emulsion and CBD emulsion. So an extra 10 cents per unit. You'll hear a lot from people, why are cannabis beverages so much more expensive than the average beverage at a grocery store? The key factor that drives this is the markup at retail dispensaries, as opposed to being 30%, is 100 or 200% on beverages. It's mostly because they favor a number of other different products that are higher margin and take up less space in their store. And so over time, that will begin to normalize. Manufacturing costs like our own should continue to come down as we continue to scale. And what you'll see is on a longer trajectory, cannabis beverage will be cost competitive with every other drink in the market.